What's up, everybody? So in today's video, we are trying to add a feature where users or providers will have an option to decide if they want to either charge a flat rate for home calls or if they want to use something more dynamic where they want to charge per mile. Because, sometimes if you set a flat rate, you might not, if the distance is too far, depending on setting your max distance, that could run into a profitability problem. So just to be a bit more dynamic, we want to add a little feature where the users can either decide if they want to add a flat rate or they want to add a per mile feature. So I'm just looking through my barber type on the server, and I'm adding a new property called house call pricing, where it's going to be a tuple where users can choose either a flat rate or per mile type of preference when it comes to offering home calls, if they want to offer home calls. And then you can see here, I'm actually adding a feature, or not a feature, I'm adding a property that I missed initially as well. So if you saw my iPhone, it was showing 0 because I didn't return that when I was creating the user object when returning the barber object. And just going through, and we got both Android and iOS set up, making sure that the ducks are in order. So on the client side, you can see that we are using Socket.io, and it's just logging whenever the users are connected. So in case you create an appointment or there's some type of transaction or interaction between two different users, it's pretty instant. So on my form state, I'm using a custom hook, use form. You might have seen something like this before in the past. We have our form state, which is acting as a state, our input handler, which updates our state, and then our set form data, where for any reason, normally I use this just for clearing my form after it's been submitted. But there's other reasons you might want to set your form data, especially right before you send it to the server, just to be sure. So you can see here, I also have a use effect, and I'm just tracking each of those values separately in the dependency array. All right, so now what I have to do is something interesting with the distance property is that it's only returned in the user results. So it's quite an expensive calculation because we're using geocoordination from MongoDB, and we don't want to use it each time for every call to a barber. Instead, what we want to do is find a way to store it and then pass it through the journey when necessary. So whenever a user clicks on a preferred barber, that way we track the miles or the distance from that person, and then we can create a calculation if the provider would like to charge a per mile rate. And we're just looking at my barber type right here. Started out with nothing, and then over time just grew massively, and made sure to add comments just in case in the future if anyone ever helps on this project with me. So hopefully it doesn't overwhelm them, because I feel like any type of big project that you build, it always starts out simple, then you continue to keep adding features, and it just becomes basically just a behemoth of code. And even now, sometimes I forget where certain files are, I forget where certain code is, and I have to go on a bit of a mission. So I really try to provide these comments, and I ask myself the question, if I came back in a year from now, 2 years from now, and I read this comment, would I know what's going on? Which is quite a long time, but so we could put it to like 2 weeks from now, right? Because a lot can happen in 2 weeks. And what I'm doing here is I'm just updating my hook for updating my price. So within updating the price, we have our update price, our house call price, the max distance, and we're going to also need to add a new field where the user will have the option to select if they want to charge a flat rate or if they want to charge per mile. Again, we're going to calculate that for them, for the user, so the user can choose this before, they'll know the price that they're going to pay before they decide to book if they want a home call. I decided if the user hasn't set anything, I'm just going to leave it at a flat rate as their default. They can always update this. And of course, I'm using cursor as well, so you can see kind of the predictive code snippets, and I do use them from time to time. So at this point, I was thinking like, what's the best way to communicate this option to select either a flat rate or per mile? And I was basically thinking, okay, well, let's use a switch from React Native Paper. Overall, I felt like it was kind of not a good idea. I mean, it serves its purpose and it could be quick and efficient. And then we also have to mess with the styles a bit because of the theming that I'm using. But overall, I felt like it wasn't working. So I used one of my own created blur views. I turned it into a style blur view with a bunch of easy to configure props that make it pretty simple for me. And I decided just to use my own buttons to handle this. So with conditional rendering, determining the color, which one is selected, and then updating the state or the form state properly. So as you can see, it's logging just fine in this example. We're just clicking and checking. So very important still, because this is going to determine how the pricing works. And like a horrible scenario would be if someone set their price to like $100 flat rate, but we charge per mile, and you would just see this exorbitantly huge price. Not good for the user experience, not good for the provider experience. So if you haven't never seen this website before, you could definitely check it out. This is where they have a lot of React Native icons that you can use in your project. So I have it bookmarked, my go-to when it comes to getting icons, just to kind of liven up the situation, liven up the experience. Now, I try not to overthink these things, like what's the perfect icon. There are probably thousands of icons on this website, so you don't want to spend too much time on it. So me, I'm just gonna I went with something simple. I chose cash, and I also chose the road for per mile, kind of the reference like driving. And we have it in a column right now, but we just need to update it really quickly. And you can see I just have a direction prop to set it to row to update the styles. And if you're wondering, I'm using style components native. So if you ever use style components and you kind of want an easy switch over into React Native development, then go ahead, style components native. All right, so I'm just logging this in my update starting price. Yes, I know I could probably just set all these values into an array and loop over it. However, simplicity is key here. So I think just handling each of them separately is fine. And then I'm adding it to the return in the response. So that way, when we update our price, it also updates our schedules as well. So, because you might have a set schedule price that might differ if you don't otherwise, which would be kind of bad as well, right? You would have a base price of like $50, and then if you update it to like 60, you would still have a base price advertised as 60, but your schedule would show the previous price. So we have to make sure we update that. And I'm just making sure that we return these now when we are doing the geo coordinates. And as you can see here, the user is 30.75 miles away. I'm on the Android emulator, and that brings you to, I think, Mountain View, California. Whereas on the iPhone emulator, you're in San Francisco. So that's kind of the coordinations. We're just using geo coordinates, and then we have our distance function, which determines how far the user is away. And I think at this point, we're going to get ready to look at the actual process or the flow where a user goes ahead and creates a booking. And we're going to see if we have the ability to select a home call and have the price calculate as it should. So I'm just checking some things to make sure once I update, there's no issues. I'm making sure I'm passing the correct information. I can get rid of this log now because we know that it's passing the value when we click, and we're gonna go for it. So we have it set to per mile. And I actually noticed an issue with the keyboard avoiding view. I was caught off guard by this. So obviously sometimes you get sidetracked in the midst of your development. And I decided I was gonna actually just take care of this problem really quick. And it's a very simple one. You can just do bottom offset. One thing though that I will come back to and missed in this video was that the bottom offset was just set to 60. I feel like you should always check the platform first. So if you're on Android, you might not need that versus if you're on iOS. So what I'm doing, I just have like a nice easy setup for development because I can switch over to a provider account at the moment. Of course, once we go live, that won't be an option, right? You'll have to go through a sign up and review process to be able to view this part of the application. Otherwise, you'll just be a user. But I also would like to see what it one looks like on Android, and two, the light view. And as you can see, there were some issues. One, it was black on black, so you couldn't see the button. So we had to fix that. And again, added another prop to our style text button where it just is white. So that just means if it's whether the screen color is, or the screen theme is dark or light, it's going to just stay the color white. And I didn't mean to make that rhyme. So at this point, I'm kind of like thinking, okay, well, the black icon doesn't really look that great. Maybe I could do something like that as well to the icon, just make it stay white if it's screen dark. Again, that's something I can come back to later. But the focus here is functionality. So we want to make sure that we don't get too caught up in the bells and whistles, as I call it. I think it's clear enough that the text is in white and the user should be able to read that. And when they select it, if they want to view the icon, that's fine, right? But what's more important is that it's going to do what we intend it to do. All right, so I'm just reviewing my form state at this time, just making sure that everything is looking okay. And the reason you're seeing Nan right now is because the user switched over to a provider account, but didn't actually receive an update, right? So it's just updated in context. So as far as the app's concerned, it's a user, but it's returning, it's not returning that property, which if it did return that property, it would return 0 if it wasn't, if it didn't have a value. So since it's just straight up undefined, you're seeing not a number, because again, not a number or an undefined, right, will pass as a string. And then we're trying to view it as a number, and it's just saying Nan. I don't know if the explanation was good, but I guess hopefully you get it. All right, on my server, just again checking my document, making sure everything's okay, pressing R in the terminal to reload the app. So now I have house calls and my max travel is 20 miles, which actually won't work because the user who's viewing my profile, and I'm the only user at the moment, right? So the user who's viewing my profile is roughly 30.75 miles away. So now we're gonna go ahead and test the per mile. Again, just making sure that we dot our T's. Again, cursor open on the server, had it check an appointment cron job that I created and give me some feedback, tell me what's going on. I think I was sending 2 push notifications by accident. The issue has been fixed. All right, so we've updated it. Now our house call says $5, but we do So that's actually confusing, right? So I was like, yeah, house call is $5. That doesn't make sense. So it's important to abbreviate the pricing, right? So is it going to be a flat rate or is it going to be per mile? And in this case, we'll do a flat rate or per mile. So I just put flat and per mile. And then that way we should be able to know, right, whether, and it's just important for the user. As you can see, I added it to the wrong part. This happens. Let me know if that's ever happened to you. You just update the wrong part. You're in the flow at this point and you're just really coding. But you know, that's why we have this emulator, so we can review what we are writing and making sure it looks correct. So now we have base price, house call is $5 per mile, which makes much more sense. And we can see here, house call $5. Cool, but that's not what we want. So what we really want is to be able to see the total price, $5 per mile. And now we're gonna have to get into that part. So you can kind of see, like, when it comes to updating just one feature in an existing project, there often is a lot of things going on that you have to consider. And I have what you see there is my user card right now. If you're looking at where you see in the near you option of the phone, the Android, that's the user card. Below there, I had another version. I asked some people which one they like more. They went with this one. So maybe in the future, I'll show you the other version. Try to get some YouTube feedback would be great. So at this point, I'm realizing that I need to pass the distance prop in order to get the calculation, because when we retrieve the barber, we actually don't get that information. We just retrieve the barber document and we trim it down to only essential properties. So we don't actually calculate this because we're not using geocoordination anymore when we retrieve a barber's profile. So the obvious thing to do then is to pass it through local search parameters and then use that, convert it back into a number, and then we can calculate the total fee for a house call. And then we can see that it's logging just fine now. And then that means we can use this within our barber page or provider page. And if you notice, the way that I tried to create this website was that it doesn't have to be a barber app. It doesn't have to be any kind of, it can be any kind of type of booking app, right? You don't have to do it for barbers. You could do it for pet grooming. You could do it for home fixes type services. It could be done for, I don't know, house sitting, any type of service, really. I think with a few modifications. All right, so I'm looking at my day of the week chips, and I'm adding these new props so that I can continue to pass them down in the flow. As you can see, it's shared within a component. And I'm just looking for something. I can't figure it out. Oh, okay, so my segmented button and the conditionals for which we can determine what the price should be. So that's the next thing that we have to update. Now the problem here is it might be undefined. TypeScript is just trying to protect me, and I totally understand it, right? So instead of taking house call and then multiplying by distance in miles, what we can do is try to create a conditional to determine what the house call price should be. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, it could be either the flat rate, which we don't need to do any calculations, or it could be the actual per mile calculation that we have to perform, or maybe they don't even want to provide house calls, and in that case we have to say not accessible. So what I did was I just sped that up real quick to get to that point. Didn't want to spend too much time showing you my struggles. All right, so at this point, I think I'm tripping. And I realized that I was returning this inside of another item, which I needed to move it out of. I think at this point, I am just thinking, what should I do? It looks like the calculation is correct at this point. And I think I'm just thinking again. And I want to make sure that it's there, right? So if it does exist, I want to make sure that we show that number, that price. Otherwise, we're gonna put the price. We're gonna put NA or not accessible. So right now, I just said if type of house call total equals string is actually incorrect, because remember when we pass them, they are strings. They're going to be strings anyway, so it doesn't make sense to say equals string. NA is a string and house call total 2fix2 is a string. So I'm like, that's not a good idea. Let's go ahead and use something else to determine whether we show NA or an actual price. I just use home call to save a letter. Thinking, and I'm thinking, and I'm thinking. I come back to this and I realize in terms of scoping, I will need it above the price determination for the service location. So whenever we update our location, whether it's a shop visit or a home call, the price should vary. So what I'm doing is whenever the state of the location is updated, you need to also update the price. So what you can see here is obviously hard-coded numbers. This is something I haven't touched in a while. And obviously sped up for you guys. And this is round one, because what you're going to see here is not correct. And of course, you know, I could have always just asked Cursor to complete it for me. I know that's kind of the thing to do, but you know, one of the great things when you're building your own projects is you get to just challenge yourself and go through the process. You know what I mean? Maybe the next time I do this, I'll have Cursor do it, but to kind of make sure that I understand it first before I pass it on to Cursor is kind of the way that I approach using AI in my coding. I would hate to kind of just have something completely automated and created and then not understand how it works, especially when a problem occurs, which can, you know, easily happen the more complex your project becomes. So right here, I'm just kind of struggling, trying to figure out what I should do. So, and I was actually incorrect. I said safe house call total, type of house call total equals string. That actually doesn't make sense, because if house call total is a string and not a number, then we know there's a problem, right? We know that it doesn't exist. But within updating the house call check, we need to make sure whether it equals not a number or there's actually a value provided. So if it doesn't equal NA, or I said not a number, but if it doesn't equal NA or not accessible, then we know that a value is there other than that, and we can use that. Again, just checking. I'm on my checkout page now to make sure that this information, well, this is not the checkout page. This is actually right before the checkout page, to make sure this information is passed to the checkout page. So the price needs to also be passed along, and we need to determine the price based on the total. So if the user selected a house call, we need to pass that price, whether or versus a user choosing a shop visit. So right here again, I'm not sure if this is round 2 or round 3, but the struggle continues. The pricing is not correct because what I'm doing is I'm adding the base price with the home call price instead of updating or completely changing it to the home call price. Eventually, I come to the conclusion that I sometimes overcomplicate my thinking. And what we have here is it's just sped up, playing around, figuring out what's not working, what's working. Spray and pray type tactics at this point, but when I realized like the simple thing to do was just to switch them back and forth, right, statically. The prices are already created by the user, so there's nothing else that I need to do in this case when determining the house call price, right? And then we were able to figure it out with additionals. When you add add-ons, here it says Michael Hunter will come to your listed address. I'm using Google Places, so I just selected 2 random locations. We have our add-on, a $20 beard trim, as well as our service for our home call. And you can see as a provider, I get this notification from Michael, which is me. I get the service value. That's minus the service fee and the fees for the service that they're providing. All right. So that was pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think. In terms of just the whole process, we were able to add a new feature for providers to allow for either choosing a per mile feature or a flat rate feature, and just giving them more options, which makes it, in terms of opportunity, in terms of flexibility, I feel like these type of things matter. Let me know what you think. Just a personal project for now. Until then, I'll get you guys on the next project and let you know what I'm working on. This is Dev Deferred. I'm out. Peace.